if you're a young professional, just leaving university, and it doesn't really matter what you study, right? Because, sustainability is kind of an all-encompassing topic, as we are, dealing with system challenges.
Welcome to the CSO Impact Podcast, where we talk to leaders in sustainability. We're discussing how we can work in a way that makes a positive impact on the planet. I'm your host, Harald Neithard, and in this episode, we talk to Andreas Wade, Head of Sustainability at Viessmann Climate Solutions, and one of the authors in our book, Leadership in Sustainable Futures. Thank you so much for that. Andreas, thank you so much for being here with us. How are you today?
I'm very well, Harald, and thanks for having me.
So very welcome. You have been one of our distinguished guests at the CSO Awards in Davos. You have been one of the jury special mentions. So you are more than welcome to be here. And we're honored that you are here with us. Why don't we start a little bit about talking about your role at the head of sustainability at Viessmann? Can you tell us a little bit about the company and maybe some of the projects that you are working on right now?
Sure. Most happy to do so, Harald. As you mentioned, I'm heading now the sustainability department of Viessmann Climate Solutions, which in fact is a business unit of the Viessmann, or has been a business unit of the Viessmann Group. So until end of last year, I was head of sustainability for the Viessmann Group. And then, as most of some of our listeners might know, Viessmann Climate Solutions was acquired by Carrier Global Corporation in the US. And so I transitioned with that. And so Viessmann is a leading provider of HVAC solutions. So the acronym HVAC stands for heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. Hence, provides climate, as we say, for living spaces. And climate in the sense that we provide heating, cooling, fresh air to the surroundings, which we all live and work in every day. Right. So, and Viessmann is very much focused on the residential and light commercial segment, as we call it. And so the equipment which we produce is basically typically going to an installer, which would then come to your home or come to a multifamily dwelling, and install a heating system, a hot water boiler, or the whole system package, like, a PV installation with photovoltaics, a heat pump, a battery storage system, maybe a car charger even, and then combine that as a living energy solution for the building. So that's Viessmann. And maybe if I can add a couple of things on topics which I'm working on. So I'm on a pretty exciting journey here with Viessmann, which started about 3 years ago, still in the old setting, joining a family company back then with over 105-year history. And being tasked to help to transform the company into a future fit business, right? So that's what we started on and embarked on about 3 years ago. And then basically identified some core impact areas where we say, okay, we clearly see that we're not yet sustainable, right? We're not yet fit for the future. So we focused on a couple of most important or material topic as the nomenclature is in the CSRD, for example. So one of the aspects we're working on is obviously the decarbonization along all the three scopes as given in the greenhouse gas protocol. So scope 1 for our own operations, scope 2 for the energy and electricity we're purchasing, which is a tiny little fraction compared to scope 3, which really is the majority of the impact we have there when it comes to, our products as well as our supply chain. So if to give you an example, we're basically coming from a situation where we have about 100 million tons of CO2 equivalent emissions across scope 3, and then about 40 to 45,000 tons in scope 1 and 2. So reducing that through measures we implement in our own factories, but then obviously also reducing scope 3 through a dedicated transformation from fossil fuel-based solutions into electrified system solutions, which I just lined out, is obviously one of the aspects which we as a team are supporting proactively. That's for sure the most important work we're doing, as this is a key lever to decarbonize the building system, right? Switching our heating systems from fossil fuel to renewable electricity and renewable energy is a big challenge given the building sector is responsible for about 30 to 40% of global CO2 emissions. That's one aspect. And then to dive a little bit more into two other projects which we're actively driving, the second one really relates to the way we design and manufacture our equipment. If you think about, a heating device, a heating system, there's obviously quite a bit of hardware involved, right? It's classical metal. You have heat exchangers, you have pumps, you have also a lot of electronics involved to steer and control the system, to interact with the grid. All these aspects basically is some stuff we package into that. And then obviously it stays in the home for, 20, 30 years. And in fact, for most of us, it's like the second to third biggest investment we do in our lifetime, right? By building that system and then buying that system. So we focus now on, how can we make that system inherently more sustainable, right? So by implementing a sustainable design guideline to, specify already in the design, okay, how can we make things more repairable? How can we ensure that certain components can be removed at end of life and then remanufactured? How can we reduce the amount of critical raw materials which are currently needed, for example, in magnets, in the pumps, and all these aspects? So that is something we're piloting. Hugely complex, but also hugely rewarding for me as an engineer. So it's really nice to work with all these engineering teams and then really try to bring things into a new direction here for these systems. And then last but not least, maybe just a third aspect, which is crucially important, we'll probably come to that later in the conversation, is the whole topic of upskilling, as we would call it, right? So basically ensuring that, the efforts we're doing is not just an effort of, a department in a company, but it really has to be like putting seeds into the ground and then having all the different functions taking up the concepts of life cycle thinking, of, understanding the impacts of our products and our services on a holistic basis into these different functions. And that starts with supply chain. It goes through marketing, sales, technical service, engineering, even finance, of course, to think about these aspects. So setting up that kind of upskilling program and educating my colleagues and other stakeholders on what we're doing and why we're doing it is, I would say, equally important as the factual technical work, even though it's more challenging for me as an engineer to steer that. But I have a fantastic team there to support me.
It's a fantastic journey and such a fantastic deep dive. Thank you for sharing all of this about these challenges that you face. You mentioned already, before we go back into some of these details, that you're an engineer. So let's talk about you a little bit. How did you start this role? What has been your journey so far to be come to this to the place where you are right now?
Sure, happy to give a bit of background, and actually I might be one of the few sustainability leaders which kind of started that journey already in his academic career, right? So I studied environmental engineering, indeed, and was really looking into all these aspects during my studies already. I was very lucky to have mentors in my university from the Club of Rome. And so we basically were educated as engineers, which are basically facing a world in socioeconomic and environmental overshoot. And so that kind of education sank deep in and was really formational for what I was doing afterwards. And then after graduation, I first went into a bit of an unusual role in an international organization, UNESCO, focusing on education, helping in the cluster office in the Middle East to develop a school book on circular economy, and basically educating kids and children about what is so important about circularity and circular economy. And then kind of after that year, I basically swung back into the classical industry, energy industry, which was the fascinating industry for me. So I was in the classical energy sector, focusing on environmental projects in oil and gas, energy efficiency there, before I then basically turned from, the traditional energy into the renewable space, where I was able to spend about 15 years in the photovoltaics industry, obviously following that industry on an amazing journey. I mean, really crazy, the learning rate there and the cost reduction, which we now have a reality where we have the cheapest electricity source on this planet is actually solar electricity. So that was obviously a very, very nice journey, 15 years. And then about 3 years ago, as mentioned, I decided to take up the next challenge in the building sector, in the heating space, the HVAC space, helping to get to a future fit state for one of the leading players here in Europe.
Fantastic how you describe this, and being on the ground with the UNESCO and already early in circularity is really rewarding to hear. Now, in your short time, or in your time, 3 years is not short in a way, but going also through a merger, we know, or an acquisition, there's new things, but there's also the daily work, obviously. So what would you say are maybe some of the biggest achievements or one initiative that stood out in the last years at Viessmann?
Yeah, I mean, I touched on it briefly. I think that the whole idea that, being basically employed by a company or invited basically by a company owner and family ownership to set up a sustainability strategy and, being able to build a fantastic team to help on that, focusing on these different aspects and also, bringing that into the organization is actually what I would call the biggest achievement, right? So, going back 3.5, 4 years, obviously there was already kind of, some form of, understanding of sustainability. And there was, as I would always call it, some engineering ethics, right? So obviously the engineers were always motivated to build machines more efficiently, right? And to make machines better, higher quality, longer lasting. So you have a couple of these data points which already feed into sustainability. But then basically building on that extremely strong foundation on the work which has been done there. And then, getting a team together, which basically was literate in these, system sciences, which define the Earth system boundaries, and then understanding the complexities of, how things are interconnected and how we are operating within that system as an economic actor with our peers, with the society as a whole, and then putting that into the company and now seeing how these seeds slowly take root. And, we have now people in engineering focusing on sustainability. We have people in supply chain management focusing on the sustainability aspects and including that in the standard processes. That is pretty amazing to see, right? Because I truly believe that this is the only way this can work, that we can't be just a department reporting on stuff and measuring stuff with KPIs, but it's really, we need to get into the, standard processes which are defining what a business does and how a business operates, and then transform those, bit by bit and engage with people on that transformation. So I would say that if I had to, call out one aspect, then really what kind of, people are able to do in that context is certainly when I'm looking back now, the last 3 years, I'm most amazed about.
When we zoom out a little bit more and look at the challenges that you had to face in your career prior, is there maybe something which was the biggest challenge and how did you overcome it that you can remember from the earlier days?
Yeah, I think, it's, I thought quite a bit about this question also. Since you shared also some of the questions in advance. I'd say it is a bit of an ongoing challenge, right? And I think that's probably, familiar to many, sustainability leaders around the globe. And that is really the challenge which we constantly need to overcome to build these bridges, right? I was referring to, the fact that obviously having a team around me which is kind of literate in understanding the systemic challenges and implications of this overshoot situation I was referring to earlier, right? So the ecological, environmental overshoot, the socioeconomic overshoot we're in, And then also, understanding that the current system we're operating in the northern and the western economy is simply not, designed for changing that, right? And so having that understanding on a scientific level, diving deep into the current discussions on that, and then building that bridge into, okay, that is the operating reality we're in. And we obviously have ambitions, and we have, targets we want to get to become future fit, to become sustainable company. And so that constant effort, which is basically ripping you apart, right? And rips the team members apart. I mean, I see that every day, how they're struggling, seeing, okay, you have, the political discussions, you have slow moving regulations, regulatory frameworks, which, you need to help to moderate, to push into the right direction, and then building that bridge to the operating reality and translating it into, okay, how are we doing things differently in the future, and how can we, slowly but steadily change that status quo. So I'd say on an abstract level that is an ongoing challenge, and on a practical level, I mean, if I can give you an example, right? I mean, if you think about, I mentioned the sustainable design guideline, right? And I mentioned that, we're focusing on our supply chain. So if you think about a heat pump, right, a device which is, very, very much on vogue at the moment, is highly discussed as one of the key technologies potentially providing a positive tipping point on decarbonization of buildings. That heat pump, right, you need 2,000 suppliers, right, which provide components which are basically put into that and then pulled together and, put into operations. And, reaching out in day-to-day discussions to these suppliers, just tier one, and then beyond tier one to tier two, and explaining them, hey guys, we actually kind of need to understand what can you do on recycled content, right? Is there a way you can change that component with a remanufactured component? And so taking these baby steps in ever, continuing discussions is obviously something where you say, okay, but I know, hey, we don't have time, right, to do this, but it's the only way to make it work, right? And so I think these kind of challenges are really what I would say are the biggest one, being that diplomat in both spaces, as I would call it, so understanding the challenges, talking, in the political space and the regulatory space, and then translating that into business reality, into the different functions, to summarize.
Building bridges, as you say, and some people call the CSO the chief sustainability orchestrator, because you have to, talk with all of the different people in the ecosystem, whether it's and stakeholders. You have been in this role there, and there's different variations where the CSO is also part of the board, and maybe sometime we know one CSO is also leading innovation. How do you see the role of the CSO evolve in the next 5 years from your point of view?
I think we're on a pretty nice trajectory, at least taking the European perspective right now, and then that's the one which is closest to me, right? With that regulatory framework that I was referring to, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, the EU taxonomy. So all these tools are now, really being set into motion, right? And that is actually something I was really looking forward to in that role. So what I see happening now, and it's slowly starting, is really that the discipline becomes really about being accountable and becoming basically sustainability accountants, right? So we need to basically now transfer into a world where it's basically no longer just a chief financial officer, but you basically have this sustainability team which is providing the metrics which we are held accountable for, right? And I think if you zoom forward the next couple of years, and we already see that, right? The socioeconomic costs of the externalities, which so far are not included in these business decisions or only marginally included, they will become unbearable for the societies we live in, right? And we see, billions and billions of euros of damages from extreme weather events. We see the, migration crisis, all these aspects will become unbearable. I mean, we can't just, continue printing money on these kind of things. So I think that kind of accountability of translating these externalities into, okay, we actually can, root them back into, what the root causes are in the current business environment. I think that will be a key role, right? And obviously engaging then with the classical accountants on, okay, can we verify, can we validate, what kind of measures do we have in place? So I think it becomes a far more formal role, which is regulated, and I think that is a very good development, right? Because that will allow people to become or to be more accountable in businesses as well, right? And what I'm also seeing, and that is actually something I really will not miss, is that obviously that the use of sustainability as a marketing tool, right, will basically completely disappear. Right, because I mean, at least in Europe, if you think about the Green Claims Directive and the greenwashing directives, you need to have proof points. You need to have, verified data points on the sustainability profile of your product, of your services, right? So I think this kind of, confusion around what does sustainability actually mean will be dialed back. And I think the sustainability leaders will play a key role in holding internally the organization accountable on, hey, is that something we can say or not? Right. And if we cannot say it, then what do we need to do to be able to say it? Right. And I think that gives a lot of internal levers on driving also innovation forward.
You touched upon maybe just a side note here that a lot of this is driven in the EU and in Europe, and we know all these laws. You have now, let's say, a special role because your new owner of the company is American, and so I guess you get slowly into some other aspects with colleagues. Just as a maybe personal, let's say, not from your company, do you have an aspect where you could compare Europe with USA in this regards? What do you see there as maybe one or 2 points to look at?
Yeah, I'd say, whereas we have a strong European bubble in that regard, right?
Yeah.
I clearly say, in the conversations I'm having, it's a US company, but it truly is a global player, right? I mean, we have a huge footprint in Asia, a huge footprint in the US, in Latin America, in Europe. But what I'm seeing is basically that due to the fact that we now have an enshrined regulatory framework in Europe, obviously there is some adaptation happening there as well, right? Because for these global companies, I mean, it's far too complicated to report and be accountable in the different regions individually, right? I mean, that will not work, right? And setting up these internal systems will actually, happen on a global level, right? And obviously there might be slight, differences between business units, but overall the governance and all these aspects in that regard, I think that dynamic will be very, very hard to dial back or to stop, because the European Economic Area is such an important, economic area on a global level that for many of these companies, these alignments will happen. And in fact, that's also what I'm experiencing, right? That the transatlantic bridge on these sustainability topics, is getting more solid. And that's also one of the things I appreciate in, that new, relationship in that exposure is obviously this razor sharp focus on, okay, how can we really make this efficient, right? And really look into the topics which we can lever jointly based on the requirements. But then also, how can this work for such an important business as the HVAC business going forward to streamline these requirements on a global level? So from that perspective, even though there might be discussions, will there be kind of a dial back on ESG and sustainability with, the day-to-day politics changing? I think from a mid and long-term perspective, as said before, right, due to these externalities, the socioeconomic damages, I think shareholders as well as stakeholders, they will not accept if companies are not, taking these accountabilities into consideration going forward. So I think from that perspective, the alignment will happen.
Happy to hear that, so that we can be optimistic. Basically, if you sell a car into the US, you adhere to the California highest standards. And maybe if you're selling a product globally, you adhere to the, let's say, European climate and green standards. So thank you for this shot of optimism and hope. Now, we see already how excited you are about your work in and how passionate you are about the topics. That's so cool to hear. Maybe what are some of the characteristics of your role in terms of leadership or so that are helpful? What is in the job description helpful to be in your role?
Yeah, so I think, and maybe that's special for the manufacturing industry or industry in general. I mean, the ability to really deep dive into technical topics or into other organizational topics and to understand, right, to be that. I think I used the term diplomat before, right? So be that kind of, maybe you can call it scientific diplomat. A colleague of mine in my previous role called it that way, which basically has the ability to be, have knowledge which is a mile wide, but not only an inch deep, but actually a mile deep, right? Or has a team at his or her disposal which can actually go that mile deep. I think that is really something which I see is extremely useful, right? Because if you want to convince people to change the status quo, right, you can't just say it, okay, yeah, I throw this at you and you take care of it. That won't happen, right? So basically being, empathetic about, okay, I know this is the way we've done it, right? And I understand the process here. And this is where we need to get to. I think that I feel is a bit of a secret recipe, which I was able to also with my team to use in the different roles I was in at the moment, in the last couple of years. And I think that is a bit of a recipe for success, because otherwise, it's very difficult. So kind of having the ability to get a team together working on this with different levels of expertise, which can go deep into the topics, and then being able to speak these different languages in translating the bigger picture into the operational reality and transformation. I think that is part of the job description. So it's not only about having that bigger picture or being good in one silo, but really trying to bridge that and bringing the team together. And then, as said before, I think last but not least, obviously, you said there is this optimism, and I think that is crucially important, right? To stay healthy also from your own perception, right? Knowing that, there are these challenges and we see all these things which are bombarding us every day on crisis situations and all these other aspects, to kind of, build a cocoon around the team and then say, hey, guys, we have a mission and we try to, progress this jointly. There will be setbacks. We know that there will be iterations. It's all about, getting the iterations moving forward and then achieving the target. I think that is probably the second item I would mention as, a critical part of the job description.
So people come to this role of CSO from all different backgrounds. And we know there's maybe 5,000 students now studying this actively. On the other hand, we need probably 50,000 or more ESG experts and CSOs just starting next January for companies who have to start reporting on this year. And basically, it's already too late if you don't have your expert in-house. You are in a unique position that you from the get-go already choose, let's say, in your academic career, to go into sustainability, environmental studies, and then NGOs, and working with all these different aspects. Now, for a young person who maybe considers, should I go, follow away with an NGO, or should I go within a corporate and, make the change happening there? What is maybe some advice that you can give a young person for their life choices, basically, in order to get into this role?
Sure. Yeah, I can. I mean, I have a little bit of a history bias, obviously, there personally, but also, from the experience I had over the last 2 decades, basically. I'd say, if you're a young professional, just leaving university, and it doesn't really matter what you study, right? Because, sustainability is kind of an all-encompassing topic, as we are, dealing with system challenges. So I'd say joining a company, right, you should, still also consider, to try to go broad, right? Obviously you can go broad in a company context, but also, I mean, today it shouldn't be a problem at all to think about in a sustainability department to say, okay, hey, why don't you do a placement with an NGO? for 6 months, right? Work with Human Rights Watch, right? Work with Greenpeace or, you name it, another NGO, to understand their perspective, to understand, how they are, trying to drive certain regulatory and policy discussions. Or, do embark with your, supply chain department to understand, okay, how are your suppliers doing this? How are industry peers doing this? So that ability to go broad, I think is critically important. And I think it's, it's something you can ask for, right? Especially if you're aiming for a role in sustainability, because that is a critical skill set to have the ability to look into different perspectives, right? Or, I was also lucky. I mean, I was able to do 3 semesters of theology, at the end of my master course. As an engineer, do sociology, right? Try to understand, how these discussions are happening, how, you read text, how you interact with people, right? So these aspects are very important. And then secondly, and I think it's not contradicting, right? But then, once you're in a certain role, don't shy away of getting deep, right? I mean, it might feel overwhelming because you have a big variety of topics, but, for the critical ones, right? The priorities you set yourselves, the material topics you're asked to develop strategies for, you need to go deep. You need to understand, okay, why do I have these CO2 emissions in a certain scope, right? Is it, due to my equipment? Is it due to the way I operate? Or, what else are material topics I have, right? Be it on biodiversity, if you're in agriculture. So don't shy away of going deep and also take the time to go deep and build, a network with experts which have the ability to support you in that, because you can't do everything yourself, right? And I think these are probably the 2 advices. Again, I mean, might sound a bit funny, but I think, also looking around what I've seen with my team, it is really a critical skill to have, that broad perspective, and then the ability to also go deep into specific topics.
So inspiring. Thank you for your insights. Whoever wants to hear more about Andreas' fascinating story, please read his essay in our book, Leadership for Sustainable Futures. And thank you again, Andreas, for your time, for all your insights, and being here with us at the CSO Impact podcast. Thank you, Andreas.
Thank you so much, Harald. My pleasure.